Well, good morning to you. Well, unless you're on the East Coast, then I'll say good afternoon. And welcome to the next Menopause Morning segment where I get to talk live about everything menopause. And today's subject is likely going to be very important for you. And because, as somebody who's worked with women really suffering with menopause for really almost 21 and a half years now, I can tell you one of the symptoms that a lot of times you're not necessarily equating to menopause, but this extreme fatigue, just tired all the time. And I hear this all the time. And really a lot of times what happens is it just gets really thrown onto, well, this is just a menopause symptom. Yeah. And what I want to help you understand today is that it's deeper than the word menopause. It's deeper than what's going on with progesterone and estrogen and testosterone in your body. And if it's something that if you don't get to the core of, it might not ever really improve. And I also want you to recognize that there's a lot of different factors that could be tying into why you're so tired right now. Yeah. So first off, let's understand that about 2 million women enter menopause every year in the US. And about 15%, the only symptoms they have is they stop having a monthly cycle and they can't conceive anymore. So that means the other 5% are suffering on some level. You could have mild symptoms or moderate symptoms or really even severe symptoms where it affects every single day of your life. And where you're at, could be a little bit different from somebody else. Yet, regardless, even if you have mild symptoms, I mean, don't you want to escape those? And if you have moderate symptoms, you absolutely want to change them. If you have severe symptoms, man, it's almost like if you feel like you need an intervention, and that's what the menopause morning is really all about. And when we think about the fatigue, what I want you to really, like give yourself a moment to have some deeper thought with fatigue, because a lot of times we just think about it. Well, I'm just tired, but it's not just about being tired. It's what I want you to think about is, and maybe even more than think about it, just feel it. What is being tired really costing you in your life? Does it make it difficult to interact with your family or friends or your spouse or your kids? Or does it make it tough for you, when you go to work for your career or your business? Is it harder to function and think because you're tired all the time? And is it affecting your fitness routine? Maybe the routine that you did back in childbearing years, you can't hack that anymore. And there's like the list just goes on from this. And what I want you to again understand is this is not about the word menopause. This is a much deeper aspect, and then the deeper aspect can have many different things that really affect why you're so tired. So when we think about this on a deeper level, even understand, the 85% of the women that are suffering with some kind of symptoms, which if you're watching this, you're probably part of that 85%. What I want you to understand is that you have the ability to become a part of the 15%. Remember, the 15%, the only symptoms they're dealing with is they no longer have a monthly cycle and they can't conceive. They're not dealing with the fatigue. They're not tired all the time. And all the other symptoms that we know as menopause symptoms, the weight gain, the mood swings, the hot flashes, and the list goes on. And to understand with that, the reason why the 15% don't have symptoms, short of not having a monthly cycle and can't conceive, which honestly most women are pretty happy about it at that point in your life, is because they still have what's known as an HPA axis that works. So to keep it as simple as I can, it's basically how your brain, your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and adrenals all work collectively and synergistically together. And when they do, and when this is all functioning properly, your body still has the perfect ability to maintain the balance that you need hormonally that you've lost as you went transition. Because you think of the transition, you go from childbearing years into perimenopause, then menopause, and then postmenopausal. And to understand that your body is designed to still maintain perfect production of progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone throughout this entire cycle, yet it's dependent on that HPA axis working properly. Yeah, and the problem is, or for most women and yourself, if you're dealing with any symptoms, is that that HPA axis is not working at the level it should be. Yeah, so when you think of menopause symptoms, it's not the ugly word menopause that is the problem. The problem is that you entered into perimenopause with an HPA axis that just simply isn't functioning well. Yeah, so now what should be taking up the slack to keep your hormones balanced is not able to do that. Now here's the other bigger kicker, because when you think of menopause symptoms, again, you think mainly about the weight gain, the mood swings, the hot flashes, the lack of proper sleep, the insomnia, the fatigue, which we're talking about today, the brain fog, the list goes on. But when you have this problem with your HPA axis, it affects other things in your body as well. So it's not just about driving symptoms of menopause, because some things that most people don't think about with menopause, when your HPA axis isn't working, your thyroid doesn't function optimally. Your mucosal lining, which is the interior lining of your gut, is probably lacking integrity, so causing problems with not only digestion but also a proper immune function as well as brain function. It has a direct effect on really every pathway of detoxification in your body. It affects your immune regulation. It affects your pro and anti-inflammatory states. It affects cellular energetics. It affects what's going on from a perspective with glucose balance, which is essential to keep your brain functioning properly. This also affects what's going on with your musculoskeletal health, so that's bone and connective tissue turnover as well as muscular integrity. And lastly, it's going to affect your neural tissue health. So this is quality sleep and mood, ability to memorize and learn, and your overall neural connectivity, which is your brain and your nervous system, which is a master regulator of everything. So what I want you to understand here is that if you do have symptoms of menopause, the deeper issue is how your brain, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals aren't working correctly, which is then causing all these other problems. Now let's look at those as tied into you being fatigued. So if you're tired all the time or pretty consistently, just literally going down that pathway of all the different things that this HP axis affects that would leave you tired. The first one is it has a negative impact on your thyroid function. If your thyroid is not functioning properly, and also if you're not getting proper thyroid hormone conversion, guess what? You're going to be tired. And that's a part of the fatigue. Also, when we think about the how the HPA axis affects that mucosal lining, remember that's the interior lining of your gut. Well, if the interior lining of your gut is compromised, your digestive function is going to be compromised. So you're not going to absorb and assimilate your nutrients or your foods and really convert those into the pull out the vitamins, the minerals, the coenzymes, the protein, the fat and carbs, like everything you need for energy. So if your gut isn't working well and you can't properly absorb and assimilate your foods, and now you don't have the ability to send that the protein and the fat into something called beta oxidation, or your carbohydrates into glycolysis, which in the end all of those kind of like filter into the Krebs cycle, which is what you would refer to as energy. So what's going on in your gut could be a big reason why you're tired. Now on top of that, remember, this HP axis plays a deep role in every level of detoxification. So it's going to affect your kidneys, your liver, your skin as your largest organ of detoxification. It's going to affect your lungs and your ability to express toxins out of your lungs. And here's the kicker with that. Because it's so interesting. Like a lot of times people will ask me, well, what's the percentage of people are fatigued? And I always say, well, 100%. We're all are not fatigued, toxic, and yeah, it's 100% of people are toxic. And I so confidently say that because I mean, years ago, I was really doing some research, and there was a university on the East Coast, and they wanted to research in the remote areas of the world to see what levels of toxicity were going on. It was really interesting because they actually took breast milk from women who live in the wilderness areas of Alaska. So they didn't live anywhere near a big city. There was no there was no level of manufacturing anything going on anywhere near them. And guess what? They still had PCBs and chemicals in their breast milk. Yeah, so like when I do bigger consumer lectures, like, and I talk about toxicity, my joke, but not joke, is that if that's a woman who lives in the wilderness area of areas of Alaska, and I live 40 miles from LAX, like what's in my body, right? So the whole thing, though, to understand is this test that was done for women who live in the wilderness areas of Alaska. They don't live anywhere near a big city, no manufacturing, no nothing. So if they still have toxins in their body, well, so do the rest of us. So do you, right? And the kicker with this is if this system isn't working well, if your HPA axis isn't working well, it has is having a negative impact on your ability to detoxify properly. So you're probably just stuck with more toxins. More toxins on your body are going to drive inflammation. Those are going to have another deeper effect on your hormonal system. And guess what? You're going to be tired. Now, on top of that, when we think about how this HPA axis affects really what's going on inflammatory wise, excuse me, I see this all the time with women in my clinic who are dealing with different triggers that are really putting them in an inflammatory state on a regular basis. And when you're inflamed, you're going to deal with pain. And a way this happens is when you're inflamed, the inflammation triggers a production of something called bradykinin, which is a neuropeptide, which is the chemical representation of pain. That's how you feel pain. And when you're inflamed, you're going to have more of that bradykinin, which means you're going to have more pain. And guess what happens when you're dealing with inflammation and pain? You're more tired. That's another kicker. Now on top of this, when we think about again another trigger, is that the HPA axis plays a direct role in cellular energetics. So energy at the most basic level. So if you're again the brain, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals are not working correctly, you're going to have a dip in cellular energetics. You're going to be tired. You're going to feel fatigue, right? Outside of that, and then when we think about what's going on with your with basically your neural tissue health. Yeah, so this has a direct impact on your quality of sleep and mood. Now the bigger part here is the quality of sleep. It's because ultimately to define proper sleep is I'm going to start from the time you wake up. You'd wake up around the or near the time that the sun would come up. You back that up about 8 hours is when you would go to bed. Some people need a little bit more, some a little bit less, but somewhere around 8 hours. And that sleep, what I'm talking about, optimal sleep, you would lay down your head at night. You would probably fall asleep within 5 minutes, and you would have a good deep sleep patterns that you cycle through the night. Maybe you wake up to go to the bathroom once, but as soon as you lay back in bed, you fall asleep right away, and you wake up feeling like energized. I always say, we should all wake up every morning like a little kid at Christmas time, ready to take on the day. And if you're not getting that level of sleep, you're going to be fatigued. And you know why? It's not just the lack of sleep. It's that when you sleep is when your body does most of its maintenance and repair. So that's a big key to make sure that you have energy, right? And on top of that, this HPA axis, when we're talking about your neural tissue health, it plays a direct role in basically the function of your brain and your nervous system. And let's understand that's the master regulator of everything in your body. Yeah. So if you're going to have energy, you need your brain and your nervous system working properly. And if you do have any imbalances in your HPA axis, which if you have any what you think is or what you're considering menopause symptoms, that does mean that your HPA axis isn't working. And in the end, you can see with this is that there's many different reasons why you could be tired during menopause, and none of them are really menopause. They're underlying factors that you can assess, that you can support, and also very importantly, you have to just to recognize your hormonal system is a reactive system. So the problem with your system is not your hormones. The problem is whatever's triggering that. Yeah, so that's the key. You want to assess really truly what's going on with your hormones on a deeper level. I'm always looking at a 24-hour urine collection, which is a way to assess what's going on with hormones, not just what's in your blood, but also what's in the tissue in your body. And I'm not just looking at like 3 or 4 different hormones. Like typically you go to the doctor, they do a blood test, they look at progesterone, they probably look at one estrogen. They usually only look at estradiol. They might look at testosterone, and that's usually about it. Yeah, but that doesn't give you a complete understanding of what's going on hormonally. That doesn't help you understand your HPA axis. It doesn't help you get to the core of what's really going on with why you're so dang tired every day. So that's why I'm always looking at this 24-hour urine collection where I'm going to look at 32 different hormones. I'm going to also see how your kidneys are affecting the system, how your liver in two different levels is affecting the system, how the chronic inflammatory states or chronic disease states, like you get the information you need to really make the right choices to kind of create this shift for you, to help with your body balancing your hormones at the core. And also, we'll get to the bottom of what those triggers are so you can eventually get to the place where you can overcome this. Because ultimately what I would love to see every woman achieve, and I would like to think that you want to achieve this yourself, is to be part of the 15%. Be a part of the 15% of the menopausal community who the only symptoms you have is you no longer have a monthly cycle and you can't conceive, and that's it. You've got all the energy you need, you've got all the brain function you need, you sleep well, your weight is regulated properly, and just living your best life to basically turn back the clock and feel young again. Yeah, so that's my focus for today. If you're watching the replay of this on really any social media outlet, if you have any questions or comments about this video, please post them below. And I look forward to my next menopause morning, which is going to be next Tuesday, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, enjoy your days. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.